Hello and welcome to episode 58 of On Liberty, coming to you live from the Center for Independent Studies in Sydney, Australia. I'm your host, Salvatore Babonis, and joining me today is Armelle Rebuffet, Country Director for Australia at BusinessFrance. Armelle Rebuffet, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you, and thanks a lot for your invitation.
Oh, well, how could we resist? Because today is July 14th, and as I'm sure everyone knows, that is Bastille Day, the French national holiday. As Bastille Day dawns in France right about now, can you tell us what it means for French people?
Yeah, thank you. That's Bastille Day is an important day for French people. It's a day when we are celebrating the unity of the French nation. So, as you know, Bastille Day is celebrating the storming of Bastille. But also what happened 1 year later with the Fête de la Fédération. That was so just 1 year after the storming of Bastille, when French people gathered in Paris and really were together without any blood or any violence. It was a very peaceful celebration to celebrate the reunification of French nation. And this is really what we are celebrating in France. And so it's really a day when people are dancing together. There are fireworks in France. It's a popular gathering, and unfortunately for us, we cannot do it this year in Australia. But usually the other years, before COVID years, we were gathering as the French community and sharing this moment. That's a strong, meaningful day for French people. So I'm happy to share this day with you today.
Well, thank you for joining us. Australians might be quite jealous that French people can unabashedly celebrate national togetherness. Of course, Australia Day every year is a big controversy here in Australia. But we're not here to talk about Australia. We are here to talk about France. And I'd like just to start out with the French-Australian trading relationship, because of course that's what you manage here for BusinessFrance. How robust is this relationship? How much does it matter for both countries?
Yes. Australia's relation with France is a positive, strong, and historical relation. Our relation started years ago, as you know, and both countries are working together in many fields, such as security, environment, and we are also sharing mutual and common interests here in our Pacific region. And on top of that, or on this context, we've been building very substantial trade relationships and also in strong investments links between Australia and France. Economically, our trading and also investment figures have long been on the rise between our two countries, even last year and since the beginning of the COVID crisis. So Australia is really a very important trading partner for France. We've seen over the past year a wide increase of our French exports to Australia. And it's not only an increase in figures, but what I consider as most important is that the kind of products we are exporting are very diversified. A couple of years ago, we were mainly exporting airplanes, and now we really see that more and more products are compatible and interesting for the Australian market, just like industrial equipments or chemical products or even food items, wine, of course. And on the other side, Australia's primary resources, are very, very important for France, and we are importing lots of iron and primary materials from Australia. So the trade relationship is a very strong one, and stronger and stronger over the years. But also, and that's something maybe we forget sometimes, but the investments on both sides are really significant and are increasing years after years. I don't know if you are aware of that, but there are about 600 French companies already implemented in Australia, and those companies altogether are employing something like 70,000 Australian people. So that's quite significant, even if we do not see it on a daily basis, because some of those companies do not even have a French name, but they are French-owned companies. And so this is something quite significant. And on the other side, in France, there are already more than 25,000 people employed by Australian companies, the biggest one being Ramsay. And Ramsay is the leading private hospital operator in France. Not only the leading foreign operator, but the leading operator in France with more than 20,000 employees. So this is already a significant relationship. I mean, a daily relationship, because it's supported by actual people, actual jobs in both our countries. And this is increasing years after years. And I do believe that Brexit will might even increase this trend. So really, our relationships are promising because they are also based on people and on true needs from our people on both sides of the world, because we are on both sides of the world. So,
right. I had no idea that Ramsay Health was so big in France, but I'd like you to bring me back home here to Australia, because you said 70,000 people work at French companies in Australia. That's a very impressive figure. Now, most of us as consumers simply think of French wine and cheese, right? And we're surprised when we're reminded by the fact that France is a major industrial country. And of course, you mentioned airplanes, and thus, Airbus immediately sprung to mind. But what other kinds of French industrial investments or industrial products might we not be aware are important here in Australia?
Well, France is very present in the infrastructure sector, with companies such as Bouygues, Vinci, Aegis. I don't know if you have heard about them, but they are major operator in Australia. For example, in services to local authorities, Transdev is operating all the boats in the harbour in Sydney. Keolis, Veolia, Suez, Engie in the management of waste and all the environment of our major cities here in Australia. We are also very present on the cosmetic sector, for example, on health, with large pharmaceutical groups such as Sanofi. I think Sanofi has got almost 5% of all the market share in the sector in Australia. So also groups such as Servier, Pierre Fabre, all those products, you see them in our daily consumption here in Australia, and probably you do not even know that it's French products, but all those are led by French companies. Or L'Oreal, I was about to forget that one.
I'm especially interested to hear you mention the infrastructure companies, because of course Australia has a massive infrastructure deficit. It's something where Australia really, it strikes me, it needs to be importing talent? Well, we hear a lot about the fact that the travel restrictions due to coronavirus have prevented engineers coming to Australia. What kind of presence does French infrastructure have in Australia? What kinds of facilities might I be using, or might our viewers be using on a daily basis that actually involve some element of French engineering?
Well, there are two things very interesting in your question. And one of them, and because this is one of our major concerns today, is how do we share talents, and how can we operate in a context where borders are closed, and even before closure, in a context where it is quite difficult to bring high qualified people and keep them here in Australia on a long-term basis. That was already a problem before the border closure with the system of short-term visa. So that's one very important point. So on that point, the way we do and the way those companies are doing is mostly based on training, trying to train Australian people to the way they are expected to work, so as to comply with what is expected from the company, and to respect what we have to do according to the contracts the company signed. So there's a lot of training and of experience sharing from between France and Australia, and nowadays it's easier to do it with all our devices. I mean, you can work together even if you are very far away, and the support of the French team is very strong for the local based team here in Australia. I just take this opportunity to also speak about the VIE. That is a very specific French program of that enables to have young French high qualified people going abroad all over the world, but especially here in Australia, and coming as a trainee in a traineeship for a French company that is based in Australia. And Bouygues, so one of the big operator in infrastructure in Australia, used to have tens of them supporting its development in Australia. So those people under this scheme can come and work up to 2 years for a French company in Australia. So they are bringing their skills, their experience, and then they go anywhere else, they go back to France. But this has been a very nice way to transfer the knowledge from France to Australia. Of course, now the borders are closed, so they are no longer able to come to Australia. Although some of them might under some specific skilled agreements. But voilà, that's one of the way to promote the way we can share the know-how and the skills between our two countries. But really, when a French company such as Bouygues or Vinci or Transdev is implementing its business in Australia, the purpose and the way they want to work is hiring Australian people. It's bringing their know-how, but with Australian people operating in the country.
Well, on that note, I do have to give a quick shout out to some of our viewers who are active in the chat right now, to Richard, Anthony. We have some French conversation going on in the chat. So
oh, that's good.
we have some French-speaking Australians. And we do actually have the question in English asking, do French companies in Australia value French-speaking Australians? That is, are they interested at all when Australians do speak French and are potential employees who are bilingual?
Well, that's really a very important point, of course, because when you do business with two countries, and even on top of the language, the mutual cultural understanding is something important. And the first step of course, is the language. So yes, I would definitely say yes, it is important. It's really a key value if you are able to speak French. But of course, most of the people working here in Australia for French companies do not speak French. Yet, if you do, it's really your added value, not only, again, just on the language, because anybody can translate, Google Translate could do the job, but really in a way to be able to cut some of the cultural barriers just through a better understanding through the language. So yeah, so yes, speaking French might be is something important, but on top of that, understanding French culture, French specificity, maybe having a bit of a knowledge of France itself is really something very big you can bring to your company here in Australia.
Well, unlike us Americans, Australians do like to think of themselves as very culture savvy and well-traveled. Uh, Obviously, just like Americans, they also tend to have problems speaking foreign languages. That's the curse of the entire
We have the
English-speaking
same.
world.
We have the same problems.
But what kind, other than language, what other kinds of intercultural barriers do you experience, between France and Australia?
Well, there it's very interesting, this question, because many French people do ask me this question. So I only came to Australia a bit more than 2 years ago, so I'm still a new expatriate here, and one of the things we have to keep in mind is that our difference are not visible difference. Well, I mean, we are looking just like each other's. The cities are very similar. The way we seem to have the same kind to live on a daily basis. So the difference are more subtle, and especially when we are doing business together. I would just give you a couple of examples I've been living myself. The first one probably is the way we consider time. For example, for French people, it's not a problem to be a bit late to an appointment. When I say a bit late, it can be up to 15 minutes. And that's really, what's the point? Well, oh yeah, sorry, I'm 15 minutes late. There was a lot of traffic. That's something we have to tell. That's one of the first things we tell to French people when they come here, or when they used to come here, or when they have a meeting. Please be on time. An appointment has to start on time, and even more a meeting. When you have a meeting with several people, it's really common in France to start 15 minutes after the supposed beginning time. That's and even in France we call it, well, the French quarter of an hour. So that's one of the of the first difference I see. But sometimes it can really make a lot of trouble if for the first meeting you have with your business partner, you are 15 minutes late and you don't even ask him to excuse you, because you consider that, well, what's the point? So that's one of the point, and the same as well for the meetings. French meetings are very long. They can last 2-3 hours. Here in Australia, it's straight to the point. Either for a B2B meeting or a big meeting with several people, you know exactly when it's going to start and at what time it's going to stop. That's what I love. That's one of the things I love here in Australia, working with Australian people. But for French people, that's not the way they're used to work. So that's one of the difference. There are lots of other difference. Again, today in today's in daily business life, I mean, in France, it's not a problem to start a meeting at 6 p.m. And in France, if you leave your office, if you're a manager, and if you leave before 6:30, your boss will tell you if you are sick, or if you had your half day off. So that's part of the things we have to explain on both sides of our world to make sure people do understand themselves and do not and to avoid confusion or making trouble among people. Well, other difference are lunch pause, for example. In France, you will have a 2 hours lunch pause, and you will invite people for a big lunch. That's the way you feel that you will make business. You would never do that in Australia. You will have a coffee, a catch-up coffee, or a breakfast, and so it's not what we call. Maybe you can call that cultural difference, but that's daily life difference that are important to understand on both sides, because it's also the case when Australian people live in France or go on and do business in France. The same for clothes. Clothes are much more casual here in Australia than in France, especially for men. You could work in France today, Salvatore.
Well, we really appreciate you not only dressing up for our interview, but especially for being on time, because it would have given us quite a heart attack if 15 minutes into our scheduled live stream we still didn't have our star guest. So thank you very much for acceding to Australian business practice. Look, we have a question from Richard in our chat window. He's asking about French technology, French high technology, and specifically about nuclear power expertise. Now, I'm aware France is a major nuclear power exporter, not just literally of nuclear electricity in Europe itself, but of nuclear power plants being exported around the world. In Australia, there's starting to be some discussion around the potential viability of nuclear power for Australia, with Australia's efforts to become carbon neutral. Are you seeing any action around potential French nuclear technology coming to Australia?
Well, I'm not an expert of this topic, but not really today. On my side, I do not really see discussions or a real trend on nuclear subjects. The discussions are much more focused on hydrogen. Really, there are lots of potential cooperations already today that are started or being looking at between our two countries. So I would really bet much more on hydrogen technologies than on nuclear, at least for what is related to the cooperation between our two countries.
Now,
That's the way I see it.
I know Australia is a leader in hydrogen vehicle
Yes,
technology. Is that actually technology going the other direction from Australia to France?
it could be, and it could also be much more on a much more wide aspect. Technologies, exchange of technologies and of the way we produce, transport, and use this new energy and sharing our experience. But the revolution of our energy mix will probably be supported by hydrogen tomorrow, and companies and governments are already working on that.
Well, it's very interesting. We often focus on large-scale technology, big tech and infrastructure and such. But I know you also work with small and medium enterprises. What kinds of business are you helping French SMEs with in their efforts to break open the Australian market, or vice versa?
Well, there are lots of SMEs, and it's very interesting not to focus on those major companies we are all aware of. Well, the first field you probably are aware of is wine, and so we are working with quite a lot of French wine producers, and of course, as they cannot physically come to Australia, we are more and more often organizing remote wine tasting. So we are importing bottles of wine from France here, and we are organizing wine tasting in different places here in Australia, or also masterclass when we have one sommelier coming to explain the specificity of such or such wine. And we are sending samples of the different wines to specific targeted people, I mean, importers, distributors, journalists. And we are organizing some 2-hour session when we are trying tasting the wines and trying to get a better knowledge. We are sometimes the French wine producers can be online with us and explaining the soil, the way they are producing their product. So well, we are trying to bring French wine and all the story around the French wines to Australia. And so this is one of the big potential market we have. It's a very growing market for us, for French companies. But this is just an example. The food products are also are penetrating the Australian market quite quickly. It can be also on the other way. I mean, one of the way we are much more working on is when an Australian company is telling us that it's got a need for anything. I don't know, a new French biscuits, for example. And so we are trying to understand exactly the kind of product he is looking for. It's a free service for Australian company. And so we will try to identify the French companies that could match the requirements, and we organize B2B meetings, and that's something that is really working very well, not only for food products, it can be also for industrial products. So that's a way to do really specific business matching between two companies, starting from the need from the Australian market, and not only trying to push French products on the market.
Now, we have to wrap up now. We're at the hour, but I just have to ask you one final question on behalf of my Australian colleagues. Now, personally, I'm an American teetotaler. I have no horse in this race, but they'll want to know, are Australian wines making an impact in France?
When you say making an impact, you mean, do we consume? Do we like Australian wine?
Do you like? Are they winning awards? How are Australian wines perceived in France?
Well, French consumers are a bit traditional. I mean, well, one big part of French people consider that French wines are the best wines in the world. But more and more, and especially among young people, we see a true interest in what they call new world wines, and they are open. It's a way to travel. I mean, tasting a non-French wine is also a way to travel and to try to get to understand something of another country's way of living or something like that. So Australian wines are more and more accepted, or more and more chosen especially by young people in France. And I must say that I never had any Australian wine when I was in France, but I have had the opportunity to discover Australian wine here, and I love them, and I have them tried by some of my French colleagues here in Australia, but also my French family when they visited me when they could come, and they like it. So really, there is a potential. We have the chance to be two countries really already in the culture of drinking wine. We like wines, so there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to discover and appreciate each other's products. And we do, and we will, more and
Two
more.
countries, two countries united by imsobriety. So I'm glad to hear it. Armelle Rebuffet, happy Bastille Day, and thank you very much
Thanks
for
a
joining
lot.
us
Thanks
today.
a lot for inviting me. Have a very nice day.
All right. I'd also like to thank our producer, Nick O'Malley. Our executive producer is Max Hawk Weaver. The director of CIS is Tom Switzer. Next week, Monica Wilkie will be interviewing Bitcoin podcaster Stephen Livera. Join her then. Thanks, everyone, for watching, and you can see us next week